Due to an emergency situation, unfortunately, we're unable to have her brilliant remarks at the opening ceremony today. She has kindly sent us her best wishes and her warmest welcome to Provost Whaley Cohen, the speakers and attendees, and we are looking forward to collaborating with her in the future. We would also like to show you a clip from the China Gulf Forum 2019, just to remind everyone how things used to be before the pandemic, and we would specifically aim to create. Please. Next, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, the Provost of New York University, Shanghai, Professor Whaley Cohen. Provost Whaley Cohen was the chair of the NYU History Department from 2009 to 2012. She was also involved in planning NYU Abu Dhabi, designing its path-breaking history curriculum. After joining NYU Shanghai in 2012 as founding Dean of Arts and Sciences, she strengthened and expanded the university's teaching and research framework. I will now hand it over to Provost Whaley Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Friends, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from lockdown in Shanghai. It's my great honor to speak to you today about cosmopolitanism in education, past, present, and future, and what more fitting venue could there be for thinking about these issues. Understanding, developing, and practicing cosmopolitanism is, of course, a major raison d'etre of our university, of NYU, perhaps most especially NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai, while at the same time, thinking about past, present, and future is especially felicitous at this particular moment when the pandemic has made us examine our customary practices and our habits of mind with renewed attention. So this is an apposite moment for us to look back on what has been achieved in the past, to characterize the university in the moment and to project a vision of the future. Today, I will speak about the idea of the university and how changing global conditions may be changing the nature of international education in ways that undercut its original intentions. About the origins of the university, there is some disagreement. If we define a university as any institution of higher learning, then the oldest in the world is likely the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, founded in the 9th century, China's Tang dynasty, by Fatima al-Fihri in Fez, Morocco. Most accounts of the origins of the university, however, privilege the European model of a degree-granting institution that offers a combination of secular and non-secular education, a model that today is dominant in global higher education. By these accounts, the title of oldest university goes to the University of Bologna in what is now Italy, founded by the Catholic Church about 1100 years ago. The University of Bologna attracted scholars and students from all over Europe, and not long after its founding, adopted an academic charter that guaranteed certain freedoms to foreign scholars, notably including unhindered passage in the interests of education, freedom of travel, and some legal protections, including immunity from responsibility for their countrymen's misdeeds. Today, the most widely influential universities of the more than 25,000 that claim that name have generally been happy to open their doors to students and faculty from other countries. The resulting transnational quality of these institutions is generally thought to support and enhance both research and teaching, both in the sense that diversity in the scholarly community can produce better comparative insights, and in the sense that the interplay of different views about what matters and different perceptions of the same objects and ideas often can give rise to greater creativity in the production of new knowledge. The global movement of students and faculty members was a prominent feature of the spreading globalization of the 20th century and the early 21st. For students, semesters away or year abroad programs became relatively commonplace, with tens of millions of students studying away, among them 1 million from China as of 2018. In other words, academic mobility became the norm for students. Crossing borders also became the norm for faculty, particularly in the form of international research collaborations, which became so common as to be not worth commenting on. The same could be said for the inclusion in scientific publications of co-authors who came from more than one country. Individual academic mobility was accompanied by several trends. One was the development of a spirit of cosmopolitanism, which did not supplant, but supplemented patriotism towards one's nation of citizenship. Let me pause here to reflect on what we mean when we speak of cosmopolitanism. In general, it's understood in terms of four scaffolded elements. First, it has to do with an individual's identifying with others as human beings rather than in terms of their national or any other identity. This has led to an inclination to see cosmopolitanism as necessarily standing in opposition to nationalism or patriotism, but that is not necessarily the case. As former NYU President John Sexton used to be fond of saying in the context of NYU's global network, we should get in the habit of thinking in terms of both and, not either or. In other words, not everything has to be mutually exclusive. Second, and as a consequence, cosmopolitanism has to do with openness to unfamiliar ideas and a general attitude of tolerance. Third, building on that foundation, logically, cosmopolitanism tends to lead to a distinct expectation that the world will move in the direction of peace, not war. Fourth, as these developments are seen by cosmopolitans as self-evidently desirable, cosmopolitanism has to do with the promotion of these aims and the actions that may lead to them. Another trend that accompanied individual academic mobility was the establishment of campus presences overseas, especially from the early 21st century, and especially in the Gulf region and in China. Some of these focused on a new school devoted to only one or a small set of disciplines, such as the Weill Cornell Medical College in Qatar and Hopkins Nanjing in China. Another model was the creation of more comprehensive research universities, such as NYU Abu Dhabi and the Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi. A third model, which was especially prevalent in China, involved the establishment of cooperative programs under which foreign universities set up institutes and programs within traditional Chinese universities. Starting in 2003, China began to develop an even more ambitious model, the Sino-Foreign Cooperative University, now mostly referred to as joint venture universities. The first batch of these all involved partnerships with British and Hong Kong institutions. The second batch involved partnerships with US universities and included NYU Shanghai and Duke Kunshan University. The third batch involved partnerships with Chinese University of Hong Kong and Moscow State University in Shenzhen and Technion Israel Institute in Shantou. Each of these experimental partnership institutions, although they often are spoken of all together in a single breath, is in fact quite distinct from the others. Each pursues its own vision of what a contemporary transnational university should be in different ways. Rather than characterizing each of these, I want to speak about the one I know best, namely NYU Shanghai, which in the manner of siblings everywhere is both like and unlike NYU Abu Dhabi. Our university is characterized in particular by an abiding commitment to prepare its students to be creative cosmopolitans who can function effectively in a multicultural context. It has pursued that commitment in a number of ways, both in terms of structure and in terms of content. Structurally, the NYU Shanghai student body is half Chinese and half from outside China, currently with about 80 countries represented. Faculty are selected through competitive global searches and hail from almost 30 different countries. First-year students live in residence halls where each is assigned a roommate from another country. Classes are taught in English, but in order to graduate, all non-Chinese students must show proficiency in Chinese at least the second-year level. Finally, all students are required to spend 1 or 2 semesters outside China, studying in other countries. At NYU Shanghai, curricular content underscores the commitment to developing multicultural perspectives. All students must complete an intellectually diverse core curriculum that immerses them in cosmopolitan philosophical values, while experiencing an active learning pedagogy that promotes critical analysis and creative thinking. They are constantly reminded that they are expected to function as a single integrated student body, where every student should spend at least 2 hours every day with someone from another culture. This repeated admonition always makes an impression on students, whether or not they actually follow through on it. Under COVID, this has, of course, been much more difficult, but we have managed to set up ways to continue much of the cross-cultural interaction, either in person or in cases where it is not yet possible for them to get together in person, through a series of courses in mixed or hybrid mode in which students must interact remotely with classmates from other countries. The goal is for the students to become cosmopolitan talents who know how to use appreciation for cultural differences to build bridges of cross-cultural understanding, and at a less philosophical and more practical level, how to ensure that multicultural teams are able to work well together. As we have observed them over the past now almost 10 years, NYU Shanghai students develop in ways that are different from how their counterparts at most other universities develop. At first, they are much like other students of their generation, wherever they come from. They have mostly grown up in environments that tend to nurture stereotypes, often not particularly well-informed stereotypes about other cultures, that tend to be somewhat negative. At the same time, they are quite defensive about their own countries, displaying what has been called a fragile patriotism. And it usually has not really occurred to them that others may have experienced the same training, so to speak, in reverse. This situation tends to cause them to treat differences in perspective and civil disagreements as hostile acts, a point of view that also causes them to miss precious opportunities to engage in respectful and thoughtful ways with their counterparts from other countries, and by doing so, to miss opportunities to acquire both new knowledge and new skills. After 4 years of intense mandatory engagement in the classroom and out of it, almost all NYU Shanghai students change dramatically. You can almost see their eyes light up as they come to realize that others do not necessarily see the world or their own society in the same way that they do, and that others' society and culture may be different from, or is susceptible to being regarded differently from, how they had been led to believe it was. In other words, they relinquish their misleading stereotypes, and at the same time, they develop a more mature appreciation for their own countries. They no longer feel that they have to see their home country as absolutely perfect and all others as somehow defective or less than. And they understand that everywhere, including their home country, has its strengths and its weaknesses. And they do not, of course, all arrive at these more nuanced understandings in the same terms. For quite some time, it was easy to imagine NYU Shanghai as embodying a spirit of global academic integration, but until rather recently seemed to be steadily intensifying. That spirit was sustained by 3 well-defined sociological and technological features of life. The first of these features was well-defined personal location. At any given moment, you could say that a person was located in a well-defined place that could be easily specified. Countries were defined by mostly uncontested geographic boundaries, and it made sense to say that a person was located in only one country at a time. In such circumstances, the government of that country would be entitled to have legal jurisdiction over them. The second feature was well-defined military technology. Many different items in everyday use could hypothetically be used as weapons, and many intellectual insights could hypothetically be used both for benign purposes and for more malign purposes, such as, say, the invention of more powerful weapons. But in general, the nature of warfare and the pace of military technological innovation were such that it was not thought especially difficult or problematic to define military research clearly and narrowly. The third feature was the non-proprietary nature of academic ideas. The insights developed at universities were global public goods. A scholar was deemed to have been productive only when their work was published, in other words, given away to the world. The human quest for understanding was understood as just that, human, not individual, nor was it seen as bound either to universities or to nation states. This was distinct from the situation for businesses which conducted proprietary commercial research, or for armies which conducted military research on behalf of and for the benefit of the nation to which they belonged. In those not so long ago times, students and professors traveled the world and the norms were clear. For example, when in Rome, professors and students from, say, the University of Toronto essentially did as the Romans did. In other words, they followed Italian rules. Neither Canada's government nor the University of Toronto tried to control their behavior, and Italy did not perceive their presence as threats. It welcomed them as full participants in the life of the university and fully expected that when they left, they would bring back to Canada new ideas that they would build on. These three features no longer hold today. First of all, thanks to the internet, social media, and video conference technology, people are no longer in a single place at any given time. Indeed, right now, as I said, I am located in Shanghai, and many of you I know are in Abu Dhabi and New York and elsewhere. A single classroom discussion can often include a teacher located in one country talking with students who are in several other countries. And even when teachers and students are overseas, their governments are much more inclined to tell them how to behave. And because of the ability to communicate almost instantaneously across national borders and across oceans, it is no longer the case that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. This gives rise to a range of expectations about classroom delivery that can be mutually inconsistent, some from their home government, some from their fellow classmates, and some from the university where they are studying. Second, the concept of dual-use technology has been dramatically broadened, with the effect that a much larger percentage of the teaching, and especially the research that takes place at universities, is at risk of being perceived as sensitive or pertinent to national security. Governments are much more likely, therefore, to demand that universities prohibit non-citizens from participating in the school's intellectual life in those domains. And they take a dim view of professors who participate in multinational research in those domains and even in others. The half-full glass is always half empty at the same time in this respect. Third, much more of the research that takes place on university campuses is being treated as a private rather than a public good. The shift in recent decades towards expecting universities to commercialize inventions funded by government grants prompted universities to set up technology transfer offices that in turn gave rise to the notion that universities properly function as producers of intellectual property that requires protection in the form, for instance, of patents against unauthorized exploitation by outsiders. In other words, what universities produce is no longer seen as a public good, but as a private good that could bring profit to the institution and benefit to the state where it was located. And as such, the idea became that it should be kept safe from others. These shifts coincided first with a worldwide rise of a wave of nationalist sentiment that posited foreigners as, by definition, actual or potential enemies. This was followed by the global pandemic, which physically closed international borders and which both made movement more difficult and tended to make outsiders seem somehow more suspect. This strengthened the view of some governments that universities were national rather than global assets, and that the knowledge they produced was private rather than a global public good. It constituted a national resource to be walled off and guarded from rival nations. So what is the likely effect of these shifts? Rather than regarding the insights gained at universities as global public goods for the betterment of all humanity, the likely effect is going to be the halting or delaying of the cultivation of human flourishing and the exacerbation of inequalities, both among nations and within nations, as governments that used to fund international cooperation cease to ensure that the benefits of research are equally shared by all. This trend really needs to be stopped. Universities are indeed a vital resource for humanity, but to fully realize that role, their true role as cosmopolitan centers of intellectual inquiry dedicated to improving our lives, they desperately need to be able to preserve the interaction of competing perspectives that prompt creative discovery. They need to be able to foster and maintain the personal relationships that are most effective in countering the stereotypes and prejudices that interfere with human progress. Universities can and should be a vital resource for humanity by being able to pursue the quest to improve through exploration the material, spiritual, and social worlds. By their exploration of natural science and technology, universities help people enjoy ever better and ever more plentiful food, shelter, tangible goods, physical power, and sensory delight. By their exploration of philosophy, mathematics, history, literature, and the arts, universities enrich the human spirit. And by their exploration of the government, of economics, and of social interaction, they advance the values of peace, harmony, and order. In all of these areas of human endeavor, it is simply more effective for people of different nations, different cultures, different mindsets to interact. The creation of new knowledge depends on the healthy engagement of difference, on the consideration of alternative possibilities, and on the ability to weigh contradictory answers in one's mind simultaneously. Training the next generation to learn how to engage with difference and learn from disagreement is one major goal that I believe universities such as NYU Shanghai and NYU Abu Dhabi and other international and joint venture institutions really do share. But it is one that seems to be regarded with rapidly diminishing urgency by certain politicians who seem to be seeking to score points without giving much thought to what they are asking the world to do without. In short, may we all continue the good work and may we all resist some of the anti-cosmopolitan trends that have raised their heads in different parts of the world and may prove to be as infectious as COVID itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Willie Cohen. I believe our audience has learned a lot from your inspiring speech and your incredible insights in cross-cultural education, universities, and also cosmopolitanism. Now we've received a few questions for you from the audience. The first question asks, do you believe that as the global pandemic ebbs away, people's belief in cosmopolitanism will be strengthened?
I'm not sure that the two are closely related in this sense, that those who believe in cosmopolitanism have probably had their beliefs strengthened by seeing it sometimes dwindling or weakening. I think that when the pandemic ebbs, as we hope it's soon going to do, that an interest in transnational education will certainly resurge, and I long for that day.
As we all do. Thank you so much. The second question asks, how should we, as college students and scholars, contribute to the advancement of cosmopolitanism?
Well, that's a long one. I could talk for another half hour about that. I think you have to keep your minds open. You have to think critically. You have to, as I said earlier, you have to keep and cultivate, or perhaps cultivate and keep, the ability to weigh two contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time, and to accept that there may not be a right answer, that both may be right. And above all, you have to seek out and actively engage with people from other backgrounds. I want to be personal for a minute and say that I think the most interesting thing for me about the last 10 years of living in China and working at NYU Shanghai and watching it develop has been what I myself have learned by teaching students from many other cultures about the stuff I thought I knew a lot about, about Chinese history, which is what I've been teaching at NYU now for almost 30 years. You never know everything, and that's what you have to remember. You always have to continue to think about things that you thought you knew backwards and forwards and inside out, and think about them from new perspectives, because that is how new knowledge is created. That is how we all move forward.
Awesome, thank you. I have two more questions. I guess they are somehow related. The question is, how do you hope other institutions or universities around the world can learn from global institutes like NYU? And the last question is, what's your vision for NYU Shanghai in the future? Or what do you wish NYU Shanghai to achieve or set an example for?
Well, I think, what can other universities learn from NYU? I think that NYU is really unique. And although I think it's the global network has in some ways set a kind of a trend, it certainly set an example of promoting the benefit, in particular, of study abroad. NYU's global network really started out with its many study away sites in Europe and South America and Africa and Australia. Then with the opening of NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai, I think it's shown how much a commitment to cosmopolitan education can speak to people around the world, perhaps in different ways, but in ways that are that ultimately will bring us all together. And I think that has to be the goal for the 21st century, to try to bring people together and not to drive them apart, or not, if not drive them apart, it's not really what I mean, not to keep them separated. So that's the first question, I guess, to some extent. The vision for NYU Shanghai. So we aspire to be a comprehensive research university. We're just approaching our 10th anniversary, and we're by no means fully grown yet. We have about the number of undergraduates we expect to have, but we're growing our graduate programs and still growing our faculty very rapidly. And I really believe, and this is partly speaking to the previous question, that the sum of the three degree granting campuses of NYU can be greater than the total can be greater than the sum of its parts. So, for example, speaking of my own department, history, I've always felt that with the addition of the historians at NYU Abu Dhabi and the historians at NYU Shanghai, most of whom have some sort of association with the department in New York. The department in New York, where I spent 20 years before I came out to Shanghai, has sort of expanded its scope without losing sight of its original main foci, as it were. And I think that's really a fantastic thing, both for students and for faculty. And the same is true, especially for graduate students who, PhD students in particular, who can study in both places, who have access to professors in 2 or 3 places and so on, and undergraduates as well. But I think that that's a part of it.
Thank you, Provost Weili Cohen. Thank you. We really appreciate you taking questions from the audience and also the remarkable speech. Thank you. Now this will conclude our opening ceremony. We will now have a break about 25 minutes, and our first session is Economics and Finance Panel discussion. The title is Sovereign Wealth Funds and Foreign Direct Investment Contributing to Post-Pandemic Sustainable Development. It will start exactly at 4 p.m. Gulf time, 8 p.m. Beijing time, and 8 a.m. New York time. I'll see you soon.